Hello, U10. We've got a bit of work to do today. The idea behind this is to help you look more carefully at sources. We've looked at sources before. I just think it's important to look at some of these in a more considered way. I'll just read what we've got here, then you can read it again, find out what it is that I want you to do. There's a couple of little exercises, or one's a small one, as a bit of a teaser for the work you're doing, which isn't really related to rights and freedoms, but it actually goes back a lot more. I've given you a couple of notes here on sources, the nature of sources, and how they might or might not work, and the changing nature of sources. Then I want you to apply those to the changing nature of sources that we're actually looking at. So they're mainly photographic. And in the photographs, you might notice that it takes you even further into the source. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll just read you these notes so that you're informed about what I'm trying to get you to do. So, as I've always thought as a history teacher, sources are really the core of any historical research, and we already know about primary sources and secondary sources. Some would say that there are tertiary sources as well. And that's mainly because we've moved into an era where we can record the nature of the sources. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at the recording, the representation of that source, or the representation itself, the text in which that source might be reproduced? It's a bit of an area of debate. So primary sources are available in different forms, and these forms are informed by the historical period under consideration. So, for example, if there's no identifiable human identifier, if you'd like to use that term, then you're looking basically at artifacts and archaeological remnants. You're familiar with what I'm talking about there. You're on a dig, you dig up some implements. What happens then? You're starting from zero, from scratch, almost literally in that sense. So you've got to look at, okay, what was this bowl or this shard or this, obviously a weapon or a part of a weapon, what was it used for? Who may have used it? When was it used? So you have to bring in lots of historical research, historical personnel, from the archaeologists to those who can do estimates of time, maybe carbon dating, etc. A lot of this is speculation. So the further back we go, the more likely that many primary sources will be artifacts and archaeological remnants. Now, these are extremely important, and it's often where we find out most about past civilizations. But they are the subject of historical speculation and debate, and as more sources are found, they might increasingly show universal patterns of social behaviour. Then that speculation, the thinking about it, takes on more and more certainty in a more what we call empirical tone, or empirical, which refers to the idea that we can test it and make it into substantial and realistic and workable data based on some hard archaeological evidence. As we moved into more advanced literate societies or civilizations, the speculation was given more factual structure or support because human thought processes were recorded for posterity, that is, for the future, to interpret. Future, or more specifically the future generations to interpret. The further back we go and the further technology advances in that field, in this field of historical research, archaeology, carbon dating, etc., and also interpretation based on what we already know, or interpolation and extrapolation, knowing something or getting to know something from what we already know, or perhaps sometimes from what we don't know. How do we fill in these gaps? These records, the written records, whether they be scrolls or material written in rock, or even the use of symbols, as we've found with Australian Aboriginal research, they may be they may be hinting to interpretations or towards interpretations that might give us some more supporting data, if you'd like, some more empirical work that we can work off. All right, now, so the little case study I want you to do today, it's something you've already looked at, so you might not have too much trouble doing this. One of the more significant archaeological finds that then led on to different source analysis was the Rosetta Stone. I'm not going to tell you too much about it now. I want you to do a bit of a take 5 exercise here. Do some thumbnail knowledge research on the Rosetta Stone and its importance to the interpretation of early writing. Now, as you know, I like to link, making sure that we link ideas and facts and knowledge all the way through. So any interpretation we did of the Rosetta Stone, which is basically the instrument we used to help us translate hieroglyphics into more modern languages, and then once those more modern languages were linked to English, or to whichever language it could have been, any modern language, we were able to assume or to make assumptions about the accuracy of those symbols. So the Rosetta Stone, we found out, had 3 sections written in 3 different languages or scripts, 2 of which we were familiar with. The top one in hieroglyphics was one we weren't familiar with. So it allowed archaeologists and surveyors and researchers to assume, to make assumptions that, okay, if the bottom 2 sections were talking about the same thing, were basically translations of a set of codes, then, or laws, then the top one must be talking about the same thing. I think it's a logical and probably pretty accurate thing to assume. So that's what you're looking at today from a particularly, I suppose, standard, conventional, but pretty reliable historical process. The what, the when, the who, and what were the consequences or the effects of understanding the Rosetta Stone. I've included, just for your help, a shot of the Rosetta Stone as it is today in the British Museum, and also a shot of the same thing with people standing around it, so you can get an idea of the scale of the rock, of the stone itself. Pretty big thing. And there's the hieroglyphic section at the top, and the other 2 sections. I can't really remember which languages they're in. I think that one of them may be Greek, the other one may be some form of Assyrian writing. Anyway, the next thing I want you to do is to consider photography. We've moved in, of course, we've done this huge jump from ancient work to the era of photography and other visual media. So the introduction of photography created new text types to be considered as sources. So if you're looking at the sources related to our work on changing rights and freedoms in the modern world, all of which are related to Australian Aboriginal rights and freedoms in this section or in this lesson, for each source, I'd like you to comment on its nature, the quality in terms of the clarity of its meaning, if it has one, its potential use and research on the topic of rights and freedoms, and its use as hard evidence of these events. Some of them are going to be more speculative than others, of course. So what have we got? We've got a diorama in the Queen Victoria building in Sydney's CBD. It's a fairly typical, there's a reasonable attempt there to be realistic in terms of the forms. It's got a painted background, and it's 5 of 15 of these different dioramas. Now, this has been placed in the QVB building. It's part of the mechanical clock there. It probably rotates and shows a lot of the events in early Australian history. It's a fairly reasonably made piece. Whether you think it's accurate or not, well, that's up to you. Have a look at what's going on, the style, what is it? I've told you what it is. It's a model or a diorama. So how can you use that in interpreting some of the material we have on rights and freedoms? This goes back to the taking of the children a long time before even something like this source, which I think is extraordinary, came out. I'm not going to make any comments on this, apart from the fact to say that it was obviously published in a newspaper of the time. It's important that you read the caption and the piece in freehand writing, which is the response to this ad. The next one has a nun leading a group of children, all of whom are Aboriginal. The next one is a cartoon, a political cartoon, which is fairly self-explanatory, but it does tell you or it gives you the idea of the tone of the time. This was done in 1989, so it's looking back at the stolen generation. But more than that, it actually tells you about how people responded to that. White Europeans responded to that. And also it tells you how the Aborigines would have responded at the same time too. It's about a particular era, even though it was done by a cartoonist prior, a long time after the events. Now, the last one, of course, is a different type of source entirely. It's a modern source. I've given you here a televised version. It says Vision there. It's called Vision, I suppose. And a transcript, a written transcript, of Kevin Rudd's sorry speech. So just watch it yourself and then read. You don't have to read the whole thing in order to be able to answer those questions, which are, as I said before, fairly straightforward. But for each one, I want you to comment on the nature of the source. What is it? How does it work in terms of its clarity of meaning, its potential use in research on rights and freedoms, and its use as hard evidence of events. You might have to make some sort of a conditional response there. It'd be okay to use as evidence if this was included, or if we were to know exactly where it came from, where it is. Do we need to go and see this more closely? Do we have to go and inspect it? Does this thing move? For example, this one here, the QVB piece. Or can you just at first blush tell a lot about the source and what it's saying about that event? Obviously, the one with the nun, the fact that she's a nun in some sort of religious institution at the time, some sort of religious, religion-based, I should say, reservation or mission. The cartoon is open to interpretation, of course. Those aren't direct quotes. These are quotes by Pryor to show attitude at the time, which of course is an important part of interpreting something at a historical level. It is important that you watch the sorry speech. It doesn't go for that long. Even if you fast forward parts of it, you'll again get an idea of what it was about. And also you'd have to talk about the historical importance of this, because the Aboriginal people had been seeking this apology for a long time as part of the restoration of their rights and freedoms. There's been news just lately where a lot of Aboriginal activists are saying, well, it promised a lot. What did it deliver? In much the same way as a lot of African Americans looked at the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. Again, it promised a lot, but how has the government responded? How has the white government responded to these demands? So the consequences, the cause, the consequences, the effects of these things are really important to a historian doing any research. So I'm going to quit now and just let you work at your own pace through these important questions of source analysis and how they impact, I hate using that term, it's using a noun as a verb, how they affect our work as historians. Thanks guys, and I'll come round and see how you're going during the course of the lesson. See you soon. Bye.